Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That is Bob Stroger with What Goes On in the Dark. That's Bob Stroger in the Hit Cutters with What Goes On in the Dark. Catherine Davis, Wild About That Thing. And Edith Wilson with He May Be Your Man, but He Comes to See Me Sometimes. Oh, you listen to Blues and News with Brother Jacob right here on Buddy Guy Radio and BrotherJacob.com. And we're here every Sunday night from 6 to 9 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. Here's what I want to do. I'm actually going to go to the live line at this time because um, my our special guest is on the live line with us. Let me turn this up. Julia, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you just fine. Thank
Oh,
you.
wonderful. Julia, President and CEO of Delmark Records, we welcome you to our program this evening. How are you today, Julia?
Doing really well. Thanks. And thanks for having me on the show. It
Oh,
was really, really great.
oh,
Thank
well,
you.
thank you. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us this evening. And um, I am just really, amazed at all the work that you have been doing over at Denmark since you all took over in 2018. And I'd love it if we could before we kind of get into Delmark for a second. I would love to just acknowledge your musicianship and that you've been into music for quite some time. Julia, I don't would you be willing to talk with us a little bit about you as a musician and how you got into music? Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure, I would. I just want to say first, I love that Edith Wilson, that he may be your man, but I want to come see you sometime. I love that he comes to see me sometime. I'm sorry. That's such a great, the track you played before. I love that too in that record.
Yes. Oh yes.
But yes, I'm happy to talk about my sort of musical history. I started playing guitar when I was 8, and I started asking for a guitar when I was about 5, and nobody really believed that I wanted a guitar. And kids didn't really play like that. I mean, it was kind of they just thought it was kind of a phase or something. But then finally, when I was about 7.5 and 8, I got a guitar and I started playing, started taking lessons, and then I had an older cousin that was sort of like an uncle to me, who was a Dixieland clarinetist. And when I was a teenager, I started learning clarinet, and I played with him in summer bands. I also played in circus bands with him. He would tour with circus bands, and I sat in with circus bands with him, which was interesting because that was the time when there were still touring, traveling circuses with live bands in that march style. And I also played in orchestra, and I was a singer-songwriter growing up. So that's sort of how I started. I also played the ukulele too. I had my great grandfather's ukulele. That's the first performance I gave, was on the ukulele.
Oh my gosh, that I am just amazed. And all the
It's the
different
secret history. The
yes.
secret.
Well, and what were like what kind of music were you were you listening to growing up, and who are some of your favorite artists that you were listening to growing up?
Well, I that's a very interesting question because I grew up, not to date myself too much, but I grew up through the 70s. And so a lot of the music that I listened to was like, or that I heard actually, was like heavy rock. Um, I I really drawn to classical music, um, which is very unusual because I wasn't really around classical music so much. But I had this idea, which is very strange actually, that of playing classical music on the guitar. And I don't, people have asked me, well, how did you think about playing classical music on the guitar? And I really don't know where I got the idea from. I just really wanted to play like melodies and different, counterpoint and classical music on the guitar. And so I really started pursuing that. And then when I started playing with my cousin, I got exposed to historical music, particularly traditional jazz and marches like Sousa marches, or like not marching band marches, but like traditional jazz, and played a lot of that circus band, circus marches, also classical music with the orchestra. And I toured with an orchestra in high school. I went to Europe with an orchestra in high school on the clarinet too. So I also listened to a lot a lot of singer-songwriters when I was a kid. Um, and when I was a teenager, I started playing in jazz bands. And I remember that the first tune that I learned was "So What," the tune "So What," and then I also learned like a blues progression and playing blues at that time. Um, just how understanding the blues form. It was I think I was 16. So I didn't get into more historical popular music, except folk music. I was really interested in older folk music until I went to college, because I went to DePaul for music school, which it is in Lincoln Park. And so I came to Chicago when I was just after my 18th birthday. So I was here in the city by myself going to music school, and I would walk down the street to go to Wives Fools. And the clubs also up on Halsted, but I went to Wives Fools more. That was my favorite. And then I started getting into the music around those clubs. I learned about Otis Rush, for example, at that time when I was probably 18, 19 years old.
Wow. So and that's kind of, I guess that's probably going to lead into my next question, because I'm curious to how and this is probably this is I know this is probably a long jump, but how did we get to 2018 where how did you get more into the blues and jazz scene? And I'm curious to know, like, what inspired you to want to purchase a record label, purchase Delmark back in 2018. I'm just curious to know what motivated you behind it.
It's a very good question. um, yeah. So I there are there are a couple of like long arcs in my life, a musical arc and a sort of business arc. And one of the sort of foundations of that was my grandfather, who was he started a machine and tool business, and what he would do was make machine and tool and die for all the farmers. So like when like an axle would break or whatever, they would make the part for them. So he was a really creative guy and a very like manufacturing oriented guy. And at the same time, the same guy was an actor, and he ran a theater company, and he converted a local grain mill, a historical grain mill, into uh, a musical theater venue. And I grew up doing musical theater in the musical theater venue with my grandfather, who also built all of these parts and fixed cars and fixed things. So that's kind of the record business right there. I mean, it's a manufacturing business. You have to understand how all the parts work together. It's very physical. Records are really physical. And understanding acoustics, understanding the studio too, and how all of the parts of the studio work together. That technical side was something that I really loved. But also then the creative side and the musical side was something I grew up in. And then when I sort of jumping ahead, I taught for 17 years at the School of the Art Institute in the sound department. And so what I did there was taught a class called Song. They brought me in as the musician in the sound department, so to teach music theory, teach song form, and teach arranging, and to people who are working with installations, people who are working with visual art, people who had videos that they wanted to score, or themes, music they wanted to put with their videos. And so I came into the sound department and I taught song. I also taught a class I taught studio classes. I taught tape classes and tape technique classes and digital studio classes. But I also taught a class called The History of Recorded Music. And it's a class that I developed over many years. And in that class was the history of music from Edison to the present day by decade. So I developed over about a decade at the school a collection of historical recording equipment, starting with Edison, so starting with a cylinder player. So I would take that in and demonstrate it, and I'd be like, "This is how a cylinder player works. This is how it plays back. This is how you make a cylinder, and this is what." The cylinder sounded like, and this is what Edison's impact was on the record business and in the music industry, and how he started the music industry in a lot of ways, and how that worked into the big three and the sort of you know outgrowth of the record business from there and and so that class was a real foundation for what I wanted to do. So I was teaching and teaching and teaching and and at the same time I was doing my own performance and sort of doing my own projects and writing and playing and learning about how to be more of a business person, because really what I'd wanted to do all my life is run a record label. And it, I say that, but I didn't really understand what that meant at the time. But I thought I did. And so but I thought, that would be that kind of business, and being a business person is something that I really wanted to do because I saw examples of it and I really wanted I was really drawn to that. I also remembered, like, I don't know, this is like a kid thing to do, but I remember listening to like the top 40 as a high school kid and tracking songs, and you think, okay, this song is really good and it's going to come up later, and then you can track its progress. And I was really interested in charting and following, what worked and what didn't, and so that was kind of a thing that I remember doing too. But um, anyway, I started thinking about business and started making my own small businesses. And then the opportunity to actually wasn't even an opportunity. I started thinking about Delmark, to be honest with you, and started thinking about Delmark first about for our own record, which we ended up releasing on the label. Um, but we were thinking about just releasing a record on the label because in terms of the avant jazz that we were doing, it fit in a lot of the the catalog that Delmark has. We were working with some of the similar musicians. It was, it definitely was part of that realm. So we thought it might fit. And then I started thinking about, I'd done a lot of work with technology and digitizing music and the going back to the history of recorded music by decade, thinking about, well, there's all of there's this label here, and there is this studio, and there is this catalog, and this is really all these parts together are what I'm interested in, and what I like to do, and what I do in a much smaller way. And so we just proposed it. And one of the things that really made it work, we think, is that, and we know actually, is that we kept everything together, the studio and the label and the catalog. So we weren't interested in separating that. We were interested in keeping the business together as a family business and keeping it moving forward in that way. So
Absolutely. Well, and I'm thank you for sharing that. I think that's really helpful for me and
it's a
insightful
lot of
for.
info.
Yeah. Well, no, but I love it. No, that's great. We love it. Um, I want to. So when you first when you purchased Delmark,
Hmm.
um, talk to me a little bit about what were some of the immediate changes that you all did. I've noticed some of the changes, but I'm here. What were some of the immediate changes that you implemented, and then I'm curious since at 28, it was 2018 when you took over,
Yes.
um,
Hmm.
and then 2020 hits, and I
Yeah.
can imagine that probably had an impact on some of the things that you were doing. So can you talk to us a little bit about what your original plans were, and even talk about it, how you've had to pivot since COVID.
Yeah, for sure. So in in terms of Delmark, it was a paper business. So I mean, it wasn't a super. There were digital aspects to it, but it wasn't a digital business. And so the first thing we did was we worked on centralizing it and digitizing. And over the first year, actually first 2 years really, but a year and a half, we increased the catalog from about 1,000 tracks digitized to nearly 12,000. And that was something that we had to put a lot of technology and tech work into place to make it happen. Um, it's not something where you just kind of say, oh, here we go, we're digitizing this now. There are a lot of different parts in the business and also working with other business partners to make that happen. And so we did that. And that was a huge um, move forward for the business in many, many ways. But it also really helped when we got to the pandemic. Because, in the pandemic, of course, we were distanced, we were quarantined, there was no live performance and no meeting. And so that having the catalog digitized and having everything available in that way was super important. And we really focused on that first, in a way that we had always planned to do, but really we focused on it pretty much extensively. So that was a huge pivot for us. I mean, the studio closed, obviously couldn't do recordings. Artist sales and artist performances essentially dried up. We had to really work with business support like PPP, and getting that in place, which we did and I'm really proud of. And it also was a really important thing for the history of the business. And setting that bar was something that kept us going throughout the pandemic. But the focus on the digital was something that was really important. We had a 5-year plan. We still do. And we're now in kind of year 4 of that. And we're sort of in the midst of planning ahead now for the next 5, sort of finishing this section and going on. Although we sort of took the last year and put it in the middle because of COVID. We had a more systematic plan of releases and the number of releases. And of course, over the pandemic, we really couldn't do that the way we thought we were going to be able to do it. So, but that's okay. We just did other things, and there's plenty to do.
Absolutely, I can understand, and I'd love it. I mean, let me ask you this too. What I'm curious to know more so about what is your experience been like, especially being a record executive, and in honor of Women's History Month. What's it like for you, especially being a record executive in what we would refer to as a male dominated industry. What has your
Yeah,
experience been like navigating some of the different business relationships and just some of the opening up more doors for Delmark and just
yeah.
what has that been like
Well,
for you?
well, for sure. And thanks for asking about that. I encounter the the idea of a woman-owned business or some aspect of that every single day, and it's not an exaggeration. And that's something that I never, I really didn't imagine would be the case. It's not something I thought about as much before I came into the business world in the way that I am now, because I was an academic and also a performer, basically an artist and an academic all of my adult life with small businesses. Okay, so I was much more independent in that way. So here I am in this business that's a medium-sized international business, really. Okay, and so you're interfacing on a B2B level, with with an industry, and encountering that in an industry is a really different scenario. And I encounter some, challenges, let's say, every day, and that's been a learning curve for me. So I also, to back up a little bit, when I was teaching at the Art Institute, one of the things I did when I was teaching studio classes, there were very, very few um, very few female faculty in the sound department. And there were also very few uh, female recording engineers. There are many more now, actually, which is good. But when I first started, and we're talking, okay, I retired to focus on the label in 2019. So it would have been like 2002, so that's sort of that range. And it's really changed a lot for the better over that time, especially in terms of higher profile female recording engineers. There definitely are many, or not many, but there are some significant ones in significant world class positions that weren't there before. But I started teaching those studio classes because there were very few female students in the classes, and that's partly because they were really uncomfortable with the technology, and they voiced this to me. They would say, well, I really, was uncomfortable asking questions. I was uncomfortable with a male faculty member, et cetera, et cetera. So having a woman, I can feel like I can ask things in a different way, or my learning style is a little different, so I can understand. You have somebody who understands, how I can articulate that. So that was something that I felt was really important to do, and one of the reasons, really, why I pursued it. I also pursued certification by DigiDesign, which is Avid Pro Tools certification, which is an engineering certification, which I got. And I did that particularly because at the time that I did it, it's a teaching certification, and it basically shows you're proficient to teach Pro Tools in an academic, in a university setting. And you go through the class, and they say, yes, you take all the tests and you pass, and so you know about the program and how it works and how to teach it. And I did that because there were 5%, or even less than that, 5% of the engineers registered by DigiDesign and Pro Tools, which is one of the main softwares used in recording studios, if not the main, but definitely one of them, where 5% were female. There was 95% men, which is a huge imbalance. And so I just felt it was really important to set an example, and I still feel it's really important to set an example. And I tell you that I still find that I still encounter it in the business and executive world, and in the business owner world too. I mean, I it's people's assumptions. Oops, sorry, I'm sitting next to my keyboard. People's assumptions are really interesting. It's really important to and I'm holding up the mirror here to myself, that it's really important to watch your preconceptions about people and situations, because people will assume certain things that are you just don't know what the real case is. So for very few people will assume, for example, that I'm the business owner or that I'm the president. Very few. Very few. And people have asked me to get them coffee. People have assumed that, asked me if I'm the secretary. People ask me if what it's like to work at Delmark, and
Oh my
and I say, well,
gosh.
totally. I swear, every day this happens to me. It's not an exaggeration. So I shouldn't I shouldn't be like dishing it all on the live radio, but here we are.
Oh my gosh. I mean, well,
I know.
that and I'm sorry that you had that experience with certain. I mean, with
Well,
folks. I mean, that is. Oh my gosh. Oh.
people, you know what? It's just important to lead by example. That's why I bring it up, because it's important to set an example, and a positive example, and be a leader. And that is the focus. That's the message that I want to send.
Absolutely. I
So
I'm glad you also brought up too about, I never would have thought about, how many, women do we see who work, as studio engineers and who are working
yeah,
in the studio. It really, I that never really I never that thought never crossed my mind. And so as you talk about that, you talk about the different career paths that are
sure,
out there and available, and it's something to really, things that make you go and make things for, for us to consider. And how do we open
yeah.
doors for more diversity in these different career paths? So yeah, thank you. Wow, thank you for sharing it. That's I
Thanks.
hold
It's a very, very Women's History Month kind of message. That's why I want.
yes.
That's why I'm going. into so much detail about it,
Yes.
primarily.
Well,
So,
no, that I love it. No, please let's keep this going. I want to talk with you as we're talking about Women's History Month. I also want to talk about Delmark artists and the
mhm.
so many great women who've recorded down through the years and who've had an impact on Delmark. I know I've got plenty of names I could list off. I'd love to hear, even if what are some names that come to mind, some recordings that come to mind, maybe recordings that you think people overlook that maybe they should that they should check out if they haven't. But I mean, what are some names that come to mind as you think about the history of Delmark and the women who've had an impact at Delmark over the years?
Sure. We just learned actually one of the things that we've been doing is really working on radio airplay, and we have a compilation which is led by Lulu Barker. And it's one of the United compilations, and we just learned that one of her tracks is now one of the, it's because partially because of Women's History Month, is now one of the top three tracks in the history of Airplay Direct for their Airplay, which is really good. And that was something that we put out on Airplay Direct last year, actually, for Women's History Month, and we put it through again. So that United compilation is a very cool one, and something that's really a catalog record that we've brought to light. Lulu Barker is the artist. So the Edith Wilson is great. I'm loving the Women of Blue Chicago compilation. Bonnie Lee, Karen Carroll, Shirley Johnson, Lynn Jordan, Big Time Sarah, Catherine Davis. That's a great compilation. I've been spending a lot of time at Blue Chicago recently and been enjoying that. Of course, Dimitri Taylor is having a new record coming out this spring, and we're really looking forward to that.
Ooh, we can't
Yeah,
wait for
we can
that.
talk about that a little bit later. Um, so Sharon Lewis had a single, "Crazy Love," which we did a digital single for her for Valentine's Day. We also did over the pandemic. We did a Women of the Blues photo exhibit in the gallery at Delmark, and the women's covers are still there. We had photos of the many of the covers of the ladies' albums, and that link is actually on the Delmark website. Some of the photos are still there in the gallery, Women of the Blues Gallery on Delmark.com. So that had hundreds of photos in it. Um, Deetra Farr, of course,
Yes.
Deetra. Yes, and has a stunning photo in that exhibit, and many, and she also is singing on Demetria's record too. She makes a guest appearance on there, which we're really thankful for.
And
Thank
I
you, Deetra.
and I know because she's been on quite a few. She's appeared on quite a few Delmark recordings. I know with like
She has.
Dave Spector, and I know with
Yep.
Mississippi Heat and Billy Flynn. So yeah.
Yep. 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 Yep.
Oh my goodness.
So
And
yeah,
Zora
for sure.
Young too. I want to make a
Zora
mention.
Young. Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Hmm.
Oh my goodness. So many people have made, such a great impact on Delmark. So many great artists. And I'm happy. Tell me more a little bit about. You mentioned about Dimitri Taylor. We could talk about. I know she's listening too. I'd love to hear. When is this new record coming out? We've been playing Riverboat a lot. People love that
Oh, thank
Riverboat.
you. That, yeah,
Um,
yeah. From the tribute. That's
yes,
that's great. Yes, Demetrius record's coming out this spring. And this is a record that it's been in production for some time. It was a little bit delayed because of the pandemic too, unfortunately. Also, sadly, originally she was going to come into the studio the day, and her brother passed away the day before she was originally going to come into the studio. So that was something that originally was. We had things really set to go, and then of course that happened, and the family had to deal with that, and so we have been working through this throughout the pandemic, finishing the record. We're getting ready to. We've done all of the overdubs and tracking. We're getting ready to do the mixing. And I know that her band is waiting patiently for tracks so they can really really work up the new tunes. She's got a great band set to go. So she has a bunch of new tunes and some traditional tunes as well. So we're really looking forward to that. That's going to be um, we will have a release date set very soon, maybe even in the next week to 10 days. We're going to be able to announce the exact date, but it's going to be, we're looking at the end of May right now. So,
Wonderful. Well, I can't
yeah,
wait. Please make sure Kevin sends me a copy. so
of course.
um,
Of course.
and are there other upcoming releases that we should also just kind of keep an eye out to in the spring or summer or this year
Yes.
even? Yeah, go right ahead. Let us
Um,
know.
yep. I know that you were just playing the Bob Stroger, which is awesome. Thank you.
Oh yes.
And then Jose Ramirez is going to be, his release date is actually um, next week. His official release date. That's in promo right now. Major League Blues, and that was the last recording session that Jimmy Johnson appeared on, was with Jose.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so that's very historical. And Dave Weld is going to have a new record. Dave and Monica and the Imperial Flames will have. It's a really really great. Um, it's there's some really great original songwriting on this record. A super awesome tune called "Mary Who," which is it's a very spooky in a very great way, and I can't really say more, but it's one of my favorite tunes and really sold me on the whole record in the very beginning. I saw them at the IBCs and they had played that song, and I was like, wow, that's a great song. And so that record's coming out next, after Jose, and then Demetria, and then in June we will have a double LP, which is in production now, which is Dave Spector's LP version of his double CD, which came out in the fall, the retrospective. So that all of these things I've been involved in on the studio side as well. I remastered all the tracks for Dave in the CD, and the LP version. I worked on preparing as well, which was a big job for me. It was my first like real LP job that I had um, sort of been the point person on completely. And except for catalog LPs and things that we put back in and that kind of stuff. So that's coming out. I also mastered the Headcutters with Bob Stroger. I recorded 3 songs and mixed and mastered the Jose record. And I'm going to be mastering Dave Weld's record and finishing Demetria's too. So it's been a lot of studio work.
Woo.
Yeah, it's been busy among all the other things, but it's great. I really love that part.
Absolutely. So I gotta ask this question because I'm sure because I'm gonna ask this question for all the artists out there, the up and coming artists, those who are aspiring to get into the blues scene. Let me ask the question: what do you look for when you're looking to hire or sign a new artist? What are some traits or qualities that you look for in an artist if you're going to consider bringing them to Delmark?
Well, it's important to think about the fact that Denmark is a very special place. So we um, we don't necessarily run our label like the traditional music. I don't know what a traditional music business label would be, but we have the catalog side, which is important, and then also the new release side. And what we have focused on is making the catalog available so that the historical artists are really supported, and people know about them, and that also helps to give a context to the new releases too, where people are coming from. But also, we've been real advocates for the older artists like Jimmy Johnson, for example. Bob Stroger. We really want to give these guys, Lindsay Alexander, great records. You know, they deserve records and recognition, and we're very much about that. Um, and making sure that people have, um, you know, really great records that that sort of the best record that they can make. And we want to do that as much as we possibly can for people. It's really our vocation and what we love to do. Demetria and Mike Wheeler too. So many great people and so many great records that we just really love to produce. So in terms of new people, um, we have been balancing all of these different factors. We try to bring new people in who have some context with the family and the older people. So for example, it was really important to have the Delmark All Stars play on the record with Jose Ramirez, and that context was really important, and the history is really important. You know, the great the real legends and greats playing with the younger people and up and coming people. And we are also, I also, you know, we're also paying attention to much younger people and younger musicians who we want to support and hear. So I don't know if that I don't know if that helps, but it's not like we're out like searching for the next big hit, for example. That's not our that's not the way we look at it, if that makes sense.
Sure. No, I think, I mean, no, I think that's helpful and understandable too, because you, so all the great artists that are already on Delmark,
Yeah,
there's so many great talent to work with, and that, no, I get. Yeah, I think, no, and maybe aside from even, yeah, and that's, yeah, I think that is understandable. I think even from a perspective of what do you look for in general, even with your current talent when you're trying to put out new music, what are some of those qualities that are important, and maybe even if you have some advice, how about this for other musicians who are also trying to establish themselves and create
yeah.
good music. What kind of advice would you give them?
Well, original songs are important. We look for original material. We look for we look for players and songwriters who are rooted in a tradition and have a context of and knowledge of a tradition, but do their own thing. Um, we we look for creativity and intelligence in that, um, and how people express themselves. We also look for sort of business-minded independence. The business is really changing, and so we're looking for people who are able to, younger people who are able to be aware of that. Um, so
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. I as you look forward and as you think about the projects that you all are currently going to release, and as you kind of think about your 5-year plan and how you all are moving
mhm.
forward, are there any? And this may not just have to be. This doesn't have to be Delmark specific, but I'm just curious. What kind of challenges are you looking at up ahead in the near future, and even just challenges maybe for the record industry in general?
Well, the format challenge is a really big one. You know, the CDs have really changed. People still buy them, but it's not like it was when we first came in. Where LPs are great, and people do buy LPs, but they take a long time and they're expensive to produce. Um, there's a lot of digital, and how to understand how to work with the digital as an artist, both in terms of the format and in terms of how to keep track of your digital business. It's a lot of work in that way. Either you're doing it or somebody else is doing it for you and with you. So the format issues are really really a big one. Video. different how video is or streaming how that's working for artists on different platforms. Um, knowing what format or like how you want your record to come out. One of the things that we work or be released, I should say, one of the things that we work with at Delmark is reel to reels. For example, we're one of a really historical tape studio, and we do reel to reel duplication. And so we have recorded some sessions on reel to reel, and that's a format that can be, people release on reel to reel even still. So it depends on what people want and what you want and how you want your music to be in the world.
Absolutely, yes, indeed. No, I couldn't agree more with that. But and I thank you. I think we appreciate that. I think we really appreciate your perspective on that, and I think it's important to think about as we move forward. And I think especially as artists, thinking about the future too, how how people consume music. I think is really important, and I'm interested in seeing how that impacts uh, the blues industry, in the near future, and as it continues to evolve. So, thank you for
But
sharing your insight on that. Go ahead.
sure, no, but I think that it's not just how people consume it, it's which is important, definitely. It's how you want it to be heard. So if you want to have your music all out on cassette, people still buy cassettes or 8 tracks. That's kind of obscure, but if you feel like for some reason that that's the way you want it to be, then you should make your music or make a release that's like that. Maybe you really want your music to be on LP vinyl, and that's the way you want it to be. And so you because of the way you wrote it and the way you want it heard, the way it was recorded. So those are all really important and valid considerations for the
Right,
artist.
right, absolutely, absolutely. Oh, Julia, I have really appreciated talk. I'm looking at. I don't know if you noticed the time. The time has flown by.
It has flown by. That's good though. That's
Oh,
really good. I've appreciated it too. I've been just like blah 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 talking so much. So I hope I haven't talked your ear off. But it's the radio, so I guess it's a good thing I'm talking so much.
yes, no, I appreciate this. I mean, this has been so insightful for me, and just learning how hearing how things have been going for you all over at
Yeah.
Delmark. And I'm glad that you all are still moving forward and putting out new releases. And I just love it. I'm glad. And it makes my job easier over here for my radio show, because
Good.
I just
Well, we'll
have
keep sending them to you.
yes. Oh, believe me, I have so much Delmark music in my rotation. So,
Good. Thank you.
but Julia, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us. If there's anything else, I don't know if there's anything else you want to share with the
Oh,
listening audience, but you can
there's
if you
one
want.
more. Yes, I do. There's one more thing. Well, I'm very excited to be producing a tribute segment, Women of the Blues tribute segment for Blues Fest this year. So that's so that and the Women of the Blues, all of the Women of the Blues work that has been happening at Delmark and in the blues community. I just want to um, put that out there for Women's History Month, bring that up in the context sort of how we started this conversation tonight. I'm really excited for this tribute and this project. It's been so much fun to go out and see all the female musicians that I have been seeing, and I'm looking forward to seeing more and working with people. So I think it's going to be a really great project, and I'm super looking forward to that and very happy.
I thank you for bringing it up. I thank you for bringing it up. I don't know how I almost forgot, but thank you for bringing it up. We're both on the same committee. So, but yes, and I know that is something we will look forward to at this year's Chicago Blues Festival.
Thank
So
you.
yes, so I can't wait. This is going to be exciting.
Yeah.
Well, Julia, thank you so much. This has been awesome. We have to check in on a
Good.
regular basis. I have to bring you on just so we can hear what's going on at Delmark and how things are going. This has been wonderful.
Love it. Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you, Julia. And if there's anything I can ever do to support you, please, you know how to reach me. You feel free to let me know.
Thanks. Likewise.
Thank you, Julia. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening and tell LBO I said hello
I
and
will tell
thank
him.
you again.
Thanks. Have a
you
good night.
Thank you. You too, Julia. Bye
Okay.
bye.
Bye bye.
That was Julia Miller from Delmark Records, president and CEO of Delmark Records, and we just got off the phone with her and learned about everything that's been going on at Delmark and her experience and what she's been up to. And so we really appreciate her taking the time to talk with us this evening. Um, I want to give a shout out. I think I see Peter Hurley is checking in this evening. So we want to say good evening to Peter Hurley. And I also want to say good evening to Karen Gerzenia, who is also checking in as well. So good evening to the both of you. And with that, let me do this. Blues and News with Brother Jacob. Let's go ahead and play some more blues for you. Let's play some more Delmark for you. Blues and News with Brother Jacob. Let me see if I can do this. Here we go.